Namo Phat. Good morning. Thank you for joining me for our daily practice check-in. Listen, listen, listen. This beautiful sound calls us back to our true home. The first mindfulness training. Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I vow to cultivate compassion and learn ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I'm determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to condone any act of killing in the world, in my thinking, or in my way of life. For our Dharma lessons, we've been reading Ajahn Thiradhammo's book, Working with the Five Hindrances. This morning we're reading Motivation Fulfilled and Loss of Expectation. Another possible cause of lethargy is that whatever motivated us to come to spiritual practice has been resolved. I've met a number of people who came to spiritual practice with particular difficulties or problems, and through the practice of meditation, these problems were resolved. Then they wondered, okay, now, what? What next? Without some disturbing issue to work on or prod them further into spiritual practice, they would lose interest and motivation and lapse into spiritual lethargy. Unless their practice went to a deeper level and they obtained some fresh spiritual nourishment, they usually didn't continue with it. At other times, the doldrums may set in because we had certain expectations which are not being fulfilled. Some people come to spiritual practice because of false promises. When am I going to levitate? I remember hearing about that one. I'm sure we all have expectations of some kind, but eventually we reach a point where we realize they aren't being fulfilled, so we can become disillusioned. It's not happening like it's supposed to, or it's not like what the book said. With disillusionment, our energy becomes diffused or dissipates, replaced by spiritual lethargy. Unless we recognize this process and reevaluate our expectations, we may soon be marooned in despair. Interestingly, many years ago in Thailand, a psychologist did a study on some of the monks. He had been a monk for a short time with Ajahn Chah and decided to do some psychology tests on the Western monks. Thus, I once filled out the Minnesota Multi-Phase Personality Inventory. He was supposed to give us a series of tests over a period of time to see our progress or regress in personality development, I think. However, he didn't finish his project. Anyway, one of the results of his research was that he found that the people who came to Thailand with the most fixed idea of what they wanted to get were the ones who left the soonest. The ones who stayed the longest were the ones who came to Thailand only provisionally. I'll stay for a month or two and see how it goes. They usually stayed for another 2 months, and then another 2 months, and then 20 years passed. You would perhaps think that it would be the other way around. You might expect that the ones who came with the most commitment to be monks for the rest of their lives would have stayed the longest, while those who were just passing by to spend 2 months meditating in warm Thailand during the Canadian winter would have left sooner. But he found that it was the opposite. The reason being that the ones who had short-term plans could reconfigure their plans according to how the practice was going. They could reflect, is it working? Is it useful for me? Yes, it seems to be going okay, so I'll stay another 2 months. But the ones who had fixed expectations found that when they got to very culturally different Thailand, the reality didn't match up to their expectations. I heard of one man from Chicago who planned to go to Thailand and become a holy monk forever. He flew to Thailand and 2 weeks later he left. The dogs were too noisy for him. He never imagined the dogs barking all night in Bangkok. He thought he'd go to Thailand to be a peaceful Buddhist temple, where everyone was peaceful and Buddhist, but the dogs were barking all night and nearly drove him crazy. I thought that Chicago wasn't actually all that quiet. I guess he got used to the Chicago Transit Authority train clanging around at all hours, but the dogs weren't barking. Somebody else who came to Thailand hadn't anticipated all the mosquitoes and bugs. It really shocked them. They came from England, where there are hardly any pesky bugs, maybe a few flies. In Thailand, you have to live with mosquitoes and ants feeding on you. So the point is that if we have very fixed expectations, it is hard to change, to adjust, to adapt to what is actually happening. Our expectations are not fulfilled, and this can, of course, lead to disillusionment, lethargy, and possibly despair. It can also propel us into other hindrances, such as restlessness and doubt. May all beings be well. May all beings be happy. May all beings be peaceful. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you for joining me today.